Nicholas Flamel. When I was in Des Moines last night, a 6th grade boy knew that name. And I usually ask a 7th grader if they know the name Nicholas Flamel. Ask an 8th grader. Ask a 6th grader. You know why? Now, some of these kids don't even know who Christopher Columbus is, but they know who Nicholas Flamel is. Because Nicholas Flamel shows up in a book called Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. And he is an alchemist who achieved immortality, and he's several hundred years old in this book. So isn't that interesting that this woman wrote this book about Harry Potter, and this name, Nicholas Flamel, shows up on a list of the Grand Masters of the Priory of Zion. Look on down there. We see Sandro Filippi, which is Botticelli, the Renaissance artist. Leonardo da Vinci. We see his name on there, Grand Master of the Priory of Zion. Robert Flood, names you'll recognize. Robert Boyle. How about Isaac Newton? Isaac Newton. Now, some people come at me and say, Brother Mike, we read that he was a Christian. We've read some of the things that he wrote. Okay? Well, we know for a fact that he was an alchemist because of other things that he wrote. And the two are incompatible. That's how come Freemasons can be in our churches today. They're not Christians. Amen? Okay? Isaac Newton. Victor Hugo. Does that name ring a bell? He wrote Les Miserables. He wrote The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And we know that he was an occultist. We see names like Claude Debussy, a French composer and an occultist. Jean Cocteau, a French artist and film producer. He's the last name that we see on the Priory of Zion list. Now, there's another name up here that I'm going to draw your attention to a little bit later on, and you're going to gasp when you see it, all right? Now, let's take a look at this painting here. This is a painting of Mary Magdalene. It was done by Georges Latours, a French artist, several hundred years old. What you see here is Mary Magdalene holding a skull, which there's several different ideas of what this is, but remember the worship of John the Baptist. And what happened to John the Baptist? Got his head cut off, okay? Some say that it's a reference to Golgotha, the place of what? The skull. Some even suggest that it's a reference to the location of the bones of Mary Magdalene, as mentioned in the DaVinci Code. But look at something else about Mary Magdalene. Notice her stomach. She's pregnant. In this painting, she is pregnant. So we know that Georges Latours believed the idea that Jesus married Mary Magdalene and they had a child. So I started looking at other paintings of Mary Magdalene. Some I couldn't show you because she's nude, but the ones you see up on the screen are clean. This is called the Shepherds of Arcadia. Notice that the shepherds are making the John the Baptist sign with their hand. Do you see that? And Mary Magdalene, you can't see it very well here, but she is showing just a little bit. She's pregnant in this painting. This was done by Caravaggio. Everybody say Caravaggio. You're going to need to know that because we're going to see that name in a little bit. Mary is holding a flower over her stomach, and notice her stomach is pooched out, kind of like mine, okay? She's pregnant in this painting. Here is another painting by Caravaggio. Notice she's holding her belly. She is pregnant in this painting. This is called Mary in Ecstasy. Notice the swollenness of her belly. She's pregnant in this painting. This was done by Botticelli. Now remember, he's a Grand Master of the Priory of Zion. This is called the Derelicta. And in this sketch, Mary Magdalene is sitting outside the Sanhedrin while Jesus is in there being charged. We do a close-up of this picture. Look at her belly. She's pregnant in this picture, isn't she? This goes back several hundred years. How about this? Stained glass in a church in Scotland. Take a look at her belt, her belly. Look how Jesus is holding her. As if they were intimate. As if they were husband and wife. How many of you are seeing something that you've never seen before? And so here's what people are telling you. Oh, don't pay attention to that DaVinci Code. Don't pay any attention to that stuff. It's garbage. You know, Dan Brown made that all up. We've already seen that not only Da Vinci believed it, but people throughout history have held on to this secret doctrine that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were husband and wife, and she had his baby. Now, that's very important to remember as we move on a little bit later. Now, take a look at these pictures here, and let's talk about the cathedrals of Europe. The reason why the popes liked the Knights Templar so well is because they helped them build all these Gothic cathedrals that you see all over Europe. Now, let me ask you, let's put some things here. Let's connect some things here. These cathedrals were built out of stone. Who is it that builds with stones? The Masons. So now we're starting to see the connection here between the Knights Templar and the Freemasons, because the Knights Templar were incorporating their secret doctrines into these Gothic cathedrals, and I'll tell you what it was in a minute. So they knew that they had to trust some of these stonemasons with this secret doctrine, so these cathedrals were built right. And so there you have the beginnings of what we now know as the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry that stemmed from these buildings and from the relationship that they had with the Knights Templars. So these cathedrals were designed to represent the sacred feminine, that thing we've been talking about all throughout this evening, the sacred feminine, goddess worship, and fertility rituals. So the inside of these cathedrals were designed to represent the woman's womb, where the birthing took place. So naturally, the outside or the entrance to these cathedrals represented what? The entrance into the womb. There again we have that almond mandorla symbol built into the entrances. So the person goes in this way, he's in the womb, he comes back out as if he is born again. And what do they call these? They call these the Mother Church, right? Because that's what they represented, the sacred mother, the sacred feminine. They're all parts of Isis worship, the goddess Isis. Let's talk about some other hidden symbols. Now, these things that I'm going to show you are for your benefit, because you're going to see these things not only as we move on through this video, but you're going to be able to watch this, understand these symbols, and then go out and see them in the world and see that these things are moving pretty fast. The symbol of the rose there. Dan Brown writes in the DaVinci Code, the rose was a symbol that spoke of the grail on many levels, secrecy. Now, have you ever heard of the phrase sub rosa? It means under the roses, or things that are done in secret. And there's a chapel that I'm going to show you here in a little bit that the ceiling is covered with roses, so that things that are in that chapel have a secret to them. So when you see the rose featured prominently in something, you might want to pay attention to it. It speaks of the secrecy, womanhood, guidance, the feminine chalice, the guiding star that led to secret truth. So the rose is a symbol for the sacred feminine or fertility. Here we have the fleur de lis, or the lily flower. Here again, a symbol for Isis worship. And of course, Isis was worshipped three ways, and there you see that on the symbol. Another symbol for the sacred feminine. Now let me throw this at you for a minute. Who was the Rose of Sharon? Jesus Christ, wasn't it? And who is the lily of the valley? It's Jesus, isn't it? Not the feminine, not the goddess, not Isis, not Mary Magdalene. It's Jesus. So you know what they have done with this? They've perverted the true gospel, and they have turned, watch this, the grace of God into lasciviousness, haven't they? Just like Paul and Peter wrote about the false prophets in the last days, turning the grace of God into lasciviousness. And here we see them in these symbols. How about this symbol on the back of the $1 bill? Talked about in numerous videos, but here's what we get from the DaVinci Code and the underlying works about it. Is that you see there the 13 finished parts, or the 13 finished levels of this pyramid. And then the separated 14th part. Well, here's the description. That it represents Isis and her husband Osiris. Isis was the goddess of fertility in Egypt, and Osiris was her husband, listen, her husband that died and was resurrected. Who's that sound like? It's a mockery of Jesus Christ, isn't it? Well, her husband was murdered. His body was cut into 14 pieces and scattered all over the earth. And so Isis is going to resurrect him. So she goes looking and finding, and she finds 13 of the pieces of her husband Osiris, and she puts them together. That's the 13 steps there on the pyramid. The 14th part she can't find. So she fashions one herself. That 14th part, represented by the illuminated eye, was his male member, the phallus, or how we would call it, we see it in Washington, D.C., we see it here at Dealey Plaza, it's called an obelisk, and it represents illumination through the male phallus. There is a connection with this and Promise Keepers. Check it out.